Winter nights have a way of changing how the world feels. Sounds disappear, colors fade, even familiar places begin to feel unfamiliar. When snow falls heavily, it blankets everything, not just roads and rooftops, but noise itself. The world becomes quieter than it ever should be. And when you are alone during a night like that, you start to notice things you usually don't. That night, the temperature had dropped far below freezing. Snow pressed itself against the windows like a white fog, blurring the outside world until nothing looked real anymore. Streetlights glowed faintly through the snowfall, casting long, distorted shadows that moved slowly as the wind shifted. It felt less like a neighborhood and more like an empty set from an abandoned film. Inside the house, everything was shut tight. Doors locked, curtains drawn. The heater hummed softly in the background, struggling against the cold. The lights were dim, not off, but low enough to leave corners of the room in shadow. It was the kind of lighting that made you feel watched, even when you knew you weren't. At least, you told yourself you weren't. Silence settled in the room, heavy and uncomfortable. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that presses against your ears, forcing you to notice your own breathing. Each inhale felt louder than it should have been. Each exhale seemed to linger too long in the air. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, every second stretching just a little longer than the last. Time moved differently in moments like this, slower, thicker, as if the night itself was waiting for something. You ever notice how your mind behaves when you're awake late at night in winter, when most of the world is asleep and the cold keeps you indoors? Your thoughts don't stay quiet. They wander, they imagine. Small, harmless noises suddenly feel important. A soft creak from the floor, a faint pop from the walls, the distant groan of the house adjusting to the cold. During the day, none of these sounds would matter, but at night, alone, they feel different. They feel closer. The house was old, the kind of old that carries its age openly. Wooden floors that contracted in the cold, producing subtle cracks and shifts. Walls that whispered when the wind pushed against them just right. It wasn't haunted, at least that's what everyone said, but it had history, and history always leaves something behind. I was alone that night. Completely alone. The television was off. My phone lay face down on the table beside me. I didn't want the glow. Light can be comforting, but it can also make the darkness around it feel deeper. I chose the darkness instead. Outside, snow continued to fall, slowly, constantly. It didn't storm, it persisted, each snowflake adding weight to the silence. And then I heard it. It wasn't loud, it wasn't sudden. At first, I wasn't even sure it was real, just a soft sound from somewhere outside the house, a muted crunch. I stopped breathing for a moment. My heart skipped, then beat harder, faster, like it was trying to warn me before my mind caught up. It's just the wind, I told myself. But the wind had stopped. The night was completely still. Another sound followed. Slightly clearer this time, slightly closer. Crunch. The unmistakable sound of something pressing down on fresh snow. My thoughts raced to find explanations. An animal, a neighbor, someone walking their dog too late at night. Each excuse sounded reasonable for about half a second until the fear underneath reminded me how late it was and how empty everything felt. My body reacted before my mind did. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. My hands felt cold, even though the heater was running. A slow tension crept into my shoulders as every muscle tightened without permission. I sat up straighter on the couch, careful not to make a sound, the kind of movement you make when you don't want to be noticed by anyone or anything. The sound came again, closer now. I glanced at the clock. 2:17 a.m. That hour carries its own weight. It's the time when most people are deep asleep, when phone calls mean emergencies, when unexpected sounds feel personal, intentional. I reminded myself that the doors were locked, the windows sealed. There was no reason to panic, no reason at all. But logic doesn't survive on winter nights. The silence returned, thicker than before, and somehow that was worse. When a sound stops suddenly, your mind doesn't relax, it waits, it asks questions, it imagines movement in the dark. Why did it stop? Did it hear something? Was it listening? I considered walking to the window just to check, just to confirm that nothing was there, but my feet didn't move. A thought stopped me cold. What if something was out there and it saw me? The heater clicked louder than before, filling the space with an artificial noise that felt almost desperate. Even it seemed uncomfortable with the quiet. My throat tightened, swallowing felt difficult. Every instinct told me something was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not violently wrong, but subtly, deeply wrong. It was the kind of feeling you can't explain, the kind that doesn't come from what you see or hear, but from something deeper, a sense that the night was no longer empty. Then came a sound that shouldn't have existed at all. Not a knock, not a scratch, just a soft movement against the door, like fingertips brushing across wood, slow, deliberate, testing. My entire body went still. This was no longer imagination, no longer nerves. Whatever was outside wasn't passing by. It was there. And in that moment, I understood something with terrifying clarity. This night wasn't going to end quietly. Something had arrived, and it wanted to come inside.
Before I go any further, there's something you need to understand. What you're about to hear isn't a campfire story. It isn't folklore. It isn't something created to entertain you for a few minutes before you move on. This story was documented, investigated, and quietly buried under explanations that never fully made sense. And if you're listening to this alone, especially on a cold night, you might want to reconsider continuing. Most people don't. They always think the warning isn't meant for them. That's the first mistake. This story was recorded after the incident, not during it. That matters, because the people involved were given time to process what happened, to calm down, to explain it rationally, and even then, they couldn't. The police report exists, the statements exist, the photographs exist. But what doesn't exist anymore are the people who experienced it. The house you're hearing about wasn't remote. That's what makes this worse. It wasn't deep in the woods or miles from civilization. It was in a quiet residential area, the kind where nothing ever happens, the kind of place where people leave porch lights on and trust the snow to keep things peaceful. Winter had settled in early that year. Temperatures dropped fast, and heavy snowfall followed night after night. The kind of winter that makes everyone stay inside, cancel plans, and turn the world inward. That's when the calls started. Not emergency calls, not panic calls, just strange ones. Neighbors reported unusual activity late at night, lights turning on and off, doors opening briefly and closing again, motion sensors triggering with nothing visible on camera. At first, it was dismissed as electrical issues caused by the cold. Winter messes with things, after all. Then there were the sounds. Footsteps, dragging noises, soft tapping against doors and windows. Always late, always brief, always gone by the time anyone looked outside. What made it unsettling wasn't how loud the sounds were, but how intentional they felt, like someone didn't want to be noticed, like they were testing boundaries. Police responded twice. Both times they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no damage, just snow. Smooth, untouched snow. And yet, the complaints continued. The house at the center of it all belonged to someone who preferred being alone. No roommates, no pets, no visitors. Someone quiet enough that their absence wouldn't be immediately noticed if something went wrong. That's important, because when you live alone, there's no one to confirm what you heard, no one to validate your fear, no one to say, "Yeah, I heard that too." Fear grows faster in isolation. The night of the incident, weather reports showed extreme cold, wind chill well below zero, snowfall heavy enough to erase footprints within minutes, visibility near zero after midnight. Perfect conditions for something to approach unnoticed. According to the statement, the sounds began shortly after 2 a.m. At first, they were subtle, easy to ignore, easy to explain away, the kind of noises that make you pause, listen, then continue what you were doing. But they didn't stop. They moved. From the outside of the house to right up against it. The resident later said the worst part wasn't the noise, it was the timing. The pauses between sounds were too long, too deliberate, as if whatever was out there was listening in return.
The snowstorm outside was relentless. By the time the night reached its peak, the roads were invisible beneath a thick, uninterrupted layer of white. Streetlights, though lit, struggled to penetrate the falling snow, their glow diffused into hazy orbs. Trees bent under the weight of the accumulated snow, their branches scraping and creaking, adding a constant, eerie soundtrack to the night. Every sound was amplified in the frozen stillness, every crack and groan of the house magnified in the darkness. Inside, the house felt smaller. The walls pressed inward with the cold, the draft sneaking around the corners, teasing the warmth that the heater worked so hard to provide. The kind of cold that doesn't just chill your body, but slowly seeps into your thoughts. It makes the mind hyper-aware, suspicious of every movement, every shadow. When you're alone on a night like this, even familiar furniture can seem threatening. The resident, the person at the center of this story, had lived alone for years. They were accustomed to the quiet, comfortable in their routines. Yet that night, something was off. A heaviness hung in the air, almost tactile, like the snow outside had seeped inside, freezing not just the floors and walls, but the very atmosphere. It was the kind of feeling that creeps in slowly, whispering to the brain, making you question what's normal. The first undeniable sign appeared just past midnight. The wind had died for a moment, and in that eerie calm, a faint tapping sounded from the outside. Not a knock, not a crash, just a rhythmic tap, gentle and deliberate against the front window, the kind of sound that makes your heart pause mid-beat. The resident froze, listening, straining to place it in the realm of the ordinary. Surely it was just branches blown by the wind, except the wind had stopped. The branches were still. The snow outside remained untouched, and the tapping continued. At first, it was easy to rationalize. Animals, perhaps, a bird trapped in the storm, something brushing against the glass. But as minutes ticked by, the sound shifted. It moved. Not a consistent rhythm, but random, as if testing the edges of perception. A pause, a single tap, another pause, then a cluster of taps, slightly louder, closer, always at the same height, the same spot, as if whatever was out there could see you, knew you were watching, and was communicating without words. The resident approached the window slowly. The snow had buried the front walkway, leaving no footprints leading up to the house. The untouched snow stretched out like a perfect white canvas, blank and immaculate, betraying nothing. No tracks, nothing, only the sound. The window rattled softly in its frame with each tap, a delicate mocking percussion that made the skin crawl. And then it stopped, just like that. Silence returned. The kind of silence that is almost worse than noise because your mind fills in the gaps. Hours passed. The resident tried to focus on mundane tasks, checking the mail, sipping coffee, reading a book, but everything felt amplified, distorted. The storm outside created a barrier to the world, making the house a trap. Every floorboard squeak sounded like footsteps approaching, every draft a whisper from the shadows. It was a night that could stretch forever, where the ordinary became ominous and every sound was a potential threat. Then came the lights. Not flickering, not a malfunction, a single deliberate flash, like someone outside had pressed a camera or a flashlight in the window. The resident spun toward the source, heart hammering. Nothing, only the snow, only shadows cast by the diffused streetlights. Then another flash, and another. Pattern, deliberate, as if someone was signaling or testing. Panic set in slowly, not explosive, not hysterical, but the kind that grips the chest, making your muscles tense, your thoughts race. Rational explanations were failing. Snowstorm conditions made it impossible for anyone to be outside unnoticed. Security cameras and motion sensors registered nothing unusual. Yet the flashes persisted, and with them the subtle sounds, a scratch here, a creak there. The snow, though untouched, seemed somehow disturbed, in ways that defied explanation. The resident retreated to the center of the house, seeking light, warmth, and safety. Every door was checked and double-checked, windows sealed, alarm system armed. Nothing. Yet the unease lingered, growing heavier with every passing minute. It wasn't fear of a break-in, it was a primal, instinctive awareness that something unseen was near, something deliberate, something patient, waiting for the right moment. Hours dragged. The storm raged outside, burying everything in whiteness. The kind of snow that erases footprints within minutes, that hides tracks so perfectly it's as if no one had walked at all. And in the oppressive silence, the resident felt it, the eyes. Not physical eyes, but the sensation of being observed, measured, tracked. A presence that didn't belong to this world, or perhaps belonged to it only during nights like this. Then the first anomaly appeared inside the house, a faint tap from the ceiling, a subtle shifting of something heavy above, as if someone or something was moving with careful precision. The resident froze, unwilling to breathe. It was impossible, illogical, terrifying. The house had an attic, locked and unused. Nobody could have accessed it. Yet the sound persisted, gentle at first, then deliberate, like footsteps pacing slowly across a hidden floor. From above, surveying, calculating. The storm outside, once a barrier, now seemed like a facilitator. It masked the sounds, disguised movement, erased proof. It was as if the weather itself conspired with the intruder. The resident considered calling someone, texting a neighbor, anything, but the storm had isolated them completely. Roads impassable, phones with weak reception, a frozen, unreachable world beyond the snow, alone. As the minutes stretched into an hour, the tapping from outside the windows resumed, the flashes of light returned, and for the first time, the resident noticed something else, a shadow, brief, subtle, flickering at the edge of peripheral vision, too large for a branch, too solid for a trick of the light. Every time they looked directly, nothing was there, but every time they looked away, it seemed closer, watching. The house that had always felt safe now felt like a cage, every locked door a fragile barrier against an intelligent, invisible presence. The snowstorm's comforting cover now became a veil for something patient, something testing, something aware. The isolation that had been routine for years was now a vulnerability. Every sound, every shadow, every flicker of light could not be ignored. And then came the most chilling moment, the awareness that whatever was out there, it wasn't just outside. It had knowledge. It knew. It had been studying patterns, predicting movements. The subtle tap on the ceiling, the movement outside the windows, the flashes of light, they weren't random. They were part of a plan, a strategy. And the resident understood instinctively. It wasn't just about presence anymore. It was about control. The night,
the storm, the isolation, they were no longer conditions, they were weapons. And by the end of Act 3, the house was no longer a home. The storm was no longer weather, the snow no longer protected. Every element of winter, the cold, the darkness, the silence, had transformed into a tool for the unknown. And as the night wore on, the first undeniable truth became clear. Something unseen was inside their awareness, moving in calculated silence, waiting for the moment to reveal itself. And when that moment came, it would leave no room for denial, no explanation, only fear.
By now, the storm outside had become a roaring presence, snow thrashing against the windows as if it wanted to smash through and reclaim the warmth inside. But the cold, the wind, and the darkness were no longer the scariest elements. The house itself had become a vessel for something watching, waiting, and patient. Something invisible, but undeniably there. The resident could feel it, not a thought, but a sensation, like icy fingers running along the spine, whispering without words. It started subtly, a faint scraping sound coming from the hallway, the kind of sound that seems to emerge from nowhere, yet you know exactly where it is. A slow, deliberate scuffing across the wooden floor. At first, the resident told themselves it was just the house settling. Floors contract in the cold. Natural creaks, logical. But when the sound repeated, paced, deliberate, moving closer, they could no longer dismiss it. The footsteps stopped right outside the bedroom door. There was a pause, as if whatever it was, waiting, listening, calculating. The air suddenly felt heavier, thicker, almost like it had weight pressing down from above. The resident's pulse accelerated, a rapid drumbeat against their chest. Every instinct screamed to leave, to run, but the snowstorm outside made escape impossible. Roads buried, no signal on the phone, completely trapped. And then, a whisper, barely audible, soft enough to be mistaken for the wind slipping through a crack, but it carried words, an unmistakable voice, distant yet intimate. "I see you." The resident froze, their breath caught in their throat. Not a scream, not a yell, just a voice that should not have been there. Logical thinking evaporated instantly. Rational explanations faded. For the first time that night, fear wasn't just a feeling, it was alive, tangible, pressing against the chest, making every second stretch unbearably long. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The dim glow of the living room lamp wavered, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Something moved within those shadows, slight, almost imperceptible, but deliberate. A figure, a shape? Impossible to tell, and yet undeniably there. The resident's head whipped toward it, eyes straining in the semi-darkness, but as always, whenever they looked directly, the shape seemed to dissolve into nothing. The sound of shuffling returned, this time from multiple directions. Footsteps pacing above in the attic, creaks from the floors below, tapping from the windows. The house was alive with presence, each sound coordinated, methodical. It wasn't chaotic, it was hunting. It was aware of every movement, every breath. Then came the whisper again, closer this time, not through the air, but inside the mind. Not literal words, but a suggestion, a command. "Don't move." The resident's muscles locked. Every instinct was overridden. Eyes darting, heart racing, yet frozen in place. It was like the house, the storm, and this unseen presence were working together to break down the senses, mental, physical, emotional. A cold draft swept past suddenly, though all doors and windows were locked. The temperature inside dropped, sharp and unnatural, like liquid ice. Frost began to form on the corners of the windows, creeping slowly, deliberately, as if marking territory. Then came the smell. Not wind or snow, something metallic, something that triggered a visceral reaction of nausea and terror. The resident gagged, a warning their body understood before the mind could process it.
It was at that moment that the first real interaction occurred. The bedroom door, which had been firmly locked, rattled, not violently, but with enough force to make the lock tremble. The doorknob moved slightly, slowly. Someone or something was testing it, pressing, tapping, waiting. The resident lunged for it instinctively, but before their hand could touch the doorknob, it stopped. Silence again. But the tension had thickened, heaviness in the chest, ringing in the ears, the kind of fear that makes you hyper-aware of every hair on your body. Then, the lights went out completely. Complete darkness, but not empty. The blackness felt solid, like the absence of light had a texture, thick, suffocating, invasive. The resident could feel it pressing from the edges of the room, creeping inward, and in that darkness, the faintest movement, something gliding across the floor, a shadow, dark as the void itself, moving just at the periphery of vision, each step silent, purposeful. A single low breath echoed through the room, not the residents, not mechanical, deep, slow, deliberate. The presence had found them, close enough now to sense, to test, to intimidate. Heart hammering, lungs aching, the resident backed away slowly, only to feel the cold air sweep past their face, as if whatever it was had moved through the wall, unseen but real. Panic rose, but escape remained impossible. Every window was sealed, every door locked. The snowstorm outside was merciless. It wasn't just the house they were trapped in, it was the night itself. The snow, the darkness, the wind, all conspiring to create the perfect hunting ground for whatever had arrived. And then came the sound that made rationality shatter. A slow, deliberate knock inside the house. Not the door, not the walls, somewhere deeper, from within. The floorboards under the feet of the resident vibrated slightly, a subtle thrum of movement somewhere just beyond sight. The knock repeated, each tap heavier, more commanding. It wasn't chaotic, it was hunting. It was aware of every movement, every breath. And then the whisper again, not audible this time, but felt in the chest, felt in the bones. You can't hide. It was no longer a threat, it was a statement of fact. The resident understood without doubt that whatever was in the house now had control over the perception of the night. It could manipulate shadows, sounds, temperature. It could enter and leave at will, and it was patient. It would wait, watch, test, strike, whenever it wanted. By the end of that first encounter, the resident knew something unmistakable. This was no intruder, no trespasser, no rational explanation. This was something older, smarter, a presence that could exist between perception and reality, between warmth and cold, between sound and silence. It had chosen the house, chosen the night, and chosen the person inside. And as the storm raged on outside, burying the world in white, one chilling thought settled firmly in the resident's mind. They were not alone. Not in the house, not in the night, not in the storm. Something else had arrived, and it was waiting.
The storm outside had reached a deafening intensity. Snow battered the windows like fists, a relentless rhythm that drowned out almost everything else. Yet inside, it was not the storm that terrified the resident. It was the presence. The unseen entity that had been testing, watching, waiting, now revealed itself in subtle but undeniable ways. It wasn't bound by walls, doors, or locks. It was everywhere and nowhere at once. Every shadow trembled with its movement. Every sound became an instrument of fear. The first undeniable sign of true terror came when the resident heard the floorboards behind them creak with precision. Not random, not accidental. A slow, calculated approach that seemed impossible to time with human intent. Each step measured, deliberate. Each moment stretched unnaturally long, as if time itself had slowed. The resident froze, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline, but the beam revealed nothing. Nothing in the room moved. Nothing visible existed, except for the oppressive weight pressing on their chest, making every breath a labor. A cold gust swept across the room, even though the windows were sealed and the doors locked. Frost began forming unnaturally on the edges of the furniture. Then the unmistakable sound of dragging, heavy, soft, relentless, started from the hallway. Something was moving across the floor outside the bedroom, something unseen, and with it came the whispering, low and insidious, "You can't escape." Panic surged. The resident stumbled backward, flashlight beams swinging wildly, illuminating walls, furniture, and corners, but each corner revealed nothing. The shadowy presence was faster, more fluid than anything imaginable. Every reflection in the mirrors flickered with shapes that weren't there moments before. Every shadow elongated unnaturally, twisting, stretching toward the resident, reacting to movement. Then came the scratching. Not a knock, not a tap. Deep, deliberate scratches along the walls, the baseboards, the floorboards. Closer now, sharper now. It seemed to be circling, surrounding. There was no sound of a body, no footsteps to track. Only the scratches, the creaks, the whisper. And every time the resident moved, the noise shifted. Not following, but anticipating. Calculated, malicious. The lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness multiple times. In those moments, the resident felt a presence brushing past them, a sensation like icy fingers grazing skin, hair standing on end, a suffocating cold that penetrated deep into the bones. Each flicker revealed a figure, vague but humanoid, standing just outside the light, vanishing whenever the light fixed. One moment at the doorway, the next in the hallway, the next behind the bed. It didn't walk. It appeared, disappeared, and moved without sound. A sudden crash in the kitchen made the resident spin. Plates shattered, cabinets slammed open. The room was empty, yet the sense of being watched intensified. A low, guttural whisper now joined the soft voice. "Why are you hiding?" It was almost inside the room, yet no one was visible. The resident's heart hammered in their chest, lungs burning, sweat and cold mingled on their skin. Fear had become physical, overwhelming, undeniable. The entity escalated. Objects began to move. Books slid across tables. Chairs shifted slightly. Curtains swayed, though no wind entered. The house itself seemed alive, responding to this presence. Each sound, each movement was designed to break the resident's mind, to make the impossible real. Rational thinking crumbled. Every logical explanation vanished under the weight of evidence that couldn't exist. No human, no animal, no natural phenomenon could explain this, and yet it was happening. And then it spoke directly, not through whispers, but with a voice that seemed inside the resident's head. Not audible, not external, but a thought implanted, loud, demanding, "Come outside." The words echoed inside the skull, vibrating with such intensity the resident nearly dropped the flashlight. The snowstorm outside no longer seemed like a barrier. It seemed like an invitation. Outside, nothing could see them. Inside, nothing could protect them. The presence controlled both realms. The first direct physical interaction occurred in the hallway. The resident, attempting to reach the front door for safety, felt a sudden weight on the shoulder, light, almost imperceptible, but real. They spun around. Nothing. The hallway was empty, yet the sensation remained. Someone, something brushing against them with intent, testing, probing. The hairs on the arms and neck rose. Every nerve in the body screamed to flee. Yet the doors were locked, the windows sealed, the storm blocking escape. Trapped completely. The entity's audacity escalated. Footsteps sounded above in the attic, low, dragging, synchronized with the scratching and whispers below. Ceiling beams creaked as if the roof itself bore down in response to the presence. The resident heard a faint wet sound, like something slithering along the floorboards, and realized it was moving towards them, silently, impossibly. The light from the flashlight trembled, revealing a vague, shifting outline in the corner, humanoid but wrong, too thin, too tall, too fluid to be human. Shadows pooled unnaturally beneath it, defying physics. Its head tilted unnaturally, observing, calculating, then gone. In the next instant, a chilling cold enveloped the room like liquid ice. Frost spread across the mirror and walls in seconds. A guttural, distorted whisper repeated, "You belong outside. You belong to the night." The resident stumbled backward, tripping over furniture, flashlight clattering to the floor. It illuminated the figure for a brief second, elongated limbs, featureless face, impossible angles, and vanished again in a blink. Heart racing, breath ragged, body trembling, they realized there was no safe corner, no protected space. The entire house had become a cage for fear. Objects began to fall at random, books, plates, lamps. Nothing heavy, but everything precise, aimed to unnerve. The present seemed to dictate physics itself. Every step the resident took was mirrored by distant movement elsewhere, a coordinated stalking that was impossible to anticipate. Every sound amplified, every shadow alive, and through it all, the whispers never ceased. "It's your turn. You can't hide." Hours, or what felt like hours, passed in this nightmare of alternating light, shadows, whispers, and movement. The storm outside was no longer a distraction. It was a shield, hiding whatever else might approach. The house, though familiar, felt alien. The walls, floors, even the air seemed animated by the entity's will. Each heartbeat was a countdown, each second a test. By the end of Act 5, the resident had come to a horrifying understanding. This was not a game, not a prank, not a hallucination induced by isolation. Whatever had entered their home was intelligent, patient, and relentless, and it had no intention of leaving. The night had become an arena, the house a trap, and the resident, the sole player, was already losing. The storm continued, relentless, unyielding outside, but inside, the true storm had begun, a storm of presence, terror, and unexplainable, inescapable horror. And as the resident backed into a corner, trembling, breathless, heart hammering, one final realization cut through every instinct of survival. This was far from over. The night had only just begun.
By now, the storm outside had become a distant roar in the residents' ears. The walls of the house, once familiar, had transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and uncertainty. Every corner held the possibility of movement. Every reflection in the windows, mirrors, and polished surfaces seemed alive, pulsating with the presence that had stalked the night. Exhaustion gnawed at every muscle, but the body was too alert to sleep, too alert to relax. And deep inside, the mind knew one immutable truth. Whatever had entered the house would not leave quietly, and neither would it allow the resident to forget. The resident's flashlight, the only source of security, had been flickering for hours, struggling against the oppressive darkness. Its beam revealed nothing tangible, yet shadows continued to move. Objects shifted when no one looked. The cold was unnatural, penetrating deep into bone and muscle. The whispers had grown more insistent, not random sounds anymore, but deliberate, taunting statements. You cannot hide. You belong outside. You can never leave. The voice seemed to resonate inside the skull, a low vibration that rattled the senses. At one point, a door slammed in the distance, somewhere deep in the house. Not the front door, not the bedroom, a door in the hallway, far away, but its impact reverberated through the floors and walls. The sound was final, definitive. It was as if the house itself had marked a boundary, warning, the night belongs to us. The resident tried to scream, but the voice inside overpowered the urge. A thought formed, louder than panic. Do not move. Do not breathe too loudly. Fear had become command, obedience, survival. The next moments unfolded like a nightmare painted in slow motion. The resident saw the faintest flicker of movement at the edge of the flashlight beam, a dark, humanoid figure with impossible proportions, elongated limbs bending at angles that should not exist. Its head tilted unnaturally, faceless, featureless, yet somehow aware. It was close, closer than logic allowed, and then it vanished. 1 second, gone. 1 heartbeat later, another shadow flickered in a different corner. This time it was closer still. The realization hit with icy clarity. There was nowhere safe. The entity was not bound by space or walls. It had infiltrated the house entirely. Objects began moving on their own. A chair slid across the floor. Plates rattled. Books toppled from shelves. Nothing fell violently, but everything moved with intent, as if to disorient, to terrorize, to break the resident's resolve. Each sound synchronized with whispers. Each shadow echoed movement elsewhere. There was no way to anticipate or escape. The storm outside, once a physical barrier, was irrelevant. The presence inside the house controlled perception, temperature, and space itself. It was omnipresent, invisible, and intelligent. Then came the final whisper, low, guttural, and impossible to ignore. It is time. The air shifted. The lights flickered one last time, revealing the faintest outline of a figure near the front door, too fast to approach, too precise to be random. The resident froze, heart hammering. The shadow did not move toward them. It waited, patiently, calculating, observing. The presence had come not to confront, but to assert ultimate control, to demonstrate that escape was impossible. The resident backed into a corner, trembling. Every instinct screamed to run, yet the storm outside and the entity inside created an impossible cage. In the darkness, shapes began forming in peripheral vision, clusters of moving shadows, faint silhouettes, flickering figures, multiplying beyond comprehension. And as they multiplied, the whispers became voices, layered and overlapping. You belong to the night. We have chosen you. You cannot leave. Desperate, the resident tried to reach the phone. Weak signal, no help. Trapped, alone, cold, exhausted. The entity seemed to shift around them, each movement orchestrated to isolate, disorient, and terrify. The flashlight fell from trembling hands. Darkness enveloped everything. Silence briefly returned, but it was the worst kind of silence, the kind that exists when predators wait, invisible, just out of reach, biding their time. The resident could feel eyes pressing through the black, watching, judging, savoring. The seconds stretched into eternities. And then came the final horrifying realization. The snow outside the house was no longer undisturbed. Footprints appeared, leading from the forest, the street, the edges of the property. No beginning, no explanation, only a path of prints that stopped at the doorstep.
Then one more appeared inside the house, not human, not animal, but unmistakable. The presence had crossed the threshold. It had entered fully, and it was near. The residents' mind teetered at the edge of comprehension and madness. They understood instinctively this was not a visitor, this was not temporary, this was a claiming. Whatever had entered the house that night had intentions far beyond observation or mischief. It had chosen, selected, assigned fate, and nothing, no barricade, no alarm, no escape could prevent it. In the final moments, the resident caught one last glimpse, a shadow in the corner, tall, featureless, impossible. It paused, head tilted unnaturally, and leaned slightly forward, as if to acknowledge the trapped human. A slow, deliberate whisper filled the room, vibrating in the air, resonating in the mind. "You are ours now, forever." The flashlight flickered and died. Darkness swallowed the room completely. Silence returned, heavier than ever, broken only by the faint howl of the storm outside. Yet the air felt alive, aware, and infinitely patient. Every object, every shadow, every particle of the room held tension. The house itself seemed to breathe in anticipation. The night had won. The resident was no longer alone, not by definition, not by perception. Something had arrived, infiltrated, and claimed the night completely. And the final haunting thought, the one that lingered beyond words, beyond comprehension, was that this presence would not leave. It would watch, wait, and move in shadows. Every winter night thereafter, every quiet snowfall, every isolated house held the same potential. The storm, the cold, the darkness, they were no longer natural phenomena. They were a warning, a veil behind which the unseen waited, patient, intelligent, relentless. As dawn approached, the storm faded slightly. Roads became visible, snow softened, but inside the house, the lingering cold, the unnatural shadows, and the echo of whispers remained. The resident emerged in daylight, but the terror had not left, not truly. Something invisible had marked them, chosen them, and when winter nights returned, it would return as well, waiting, watching, patient. And the resident, and anyone who might hear this story, would never be alone again. Because on winter nights like this, silence is not empty, shadows are not still, and whatever moves in the snow does not forgive. The storm had passed outside. The true storm inside, however, had only just begun.